I said, my name is Mallory. I am the head of customer success at Humanitech. Oh, 1 second. Let me just fix the fact that Google Chrome really does not like me today. All right. Technical difficulties, because nothing in life is easy when you deal with technology every single day. All right. Perfect. Okay, that's better. So, like I said, my name is Mallory, head of customer success at Humanitech. I came into this role with an interesting background that has brought some cool perspective to this part of our team, and I'm actually a full stack engineer by background, but I'm also an anthropologist, and that puts a very interesting, I think, perspective on things. And when we really start looking into how we build these programs and why we build these things, it has a lot to do with how humans and technology work together and sometimes don't. If you've seen any of my other talks, including the very notorious Devops is Dead talk, you'll understand why I think it is so important to make that intersection of humans and technology so close and to be able to make things easier for the people that are doing the technical work. So if you have any questions or you want to follow up on any of this stuff, you can find me via email. You can find me on Twitter, X, whatever they call it. I don't really post often, so you're probably better to find me on LinkedIn. Pretty sure I'm the only Mallory Haig out there, so that shouldn't be too hard. Also in the platform engineering Slack community, which I do occasionally pop into and take a look around. So today I want to cover kind of 4 key areas. There's 4 really important components of this talk that I think will be integral to your platform engineering initiative. So the first thing is what is a minimum viable platform? We're going to explore what we mean when we say this and how we define it and what the outcomes are. We're going to talk about the difference between small business, small, medium business, and enterprise when it comes to adopting platform engineering through this methodology, and just take some of the learnings we've had here at Humanitech Customer Success in that regard in order to make your initiative better. There are some common adoption problems that we see that I also want to bring up with you so that you can learn and have a better understanding of how to counter those yourself. And then finally, I actually have a adoption plan sample to show you that is based on a real life example. So we'll get right into it. Before I quickly go into this, I did want to mention Maria was very kind to say that I came up with the minimum viable platform framework, but that was actually a really nice collaborative effort with my team. We have an incredible roster of experts from all the major cloud providers, as well as folks that have been in the front, on the front lines as both engineers and platform engineers that are part of this team and were part of building this process. I just sort of am the one that tidied it all up and made it look pretty for the internet. So definitely big shout out to those guys because it's just been an amazing experience to build this out and to learn about what works and what doesn't in platform engineering with them. So just wanted to throw that out there. But minimum viable platform as both a program and a mindset are a way to really make sure your platform engineering can show initiative and can do it quickly. And the way it does this is by it allows you to identify pioneering teams that lead the way on innovation. This is often a platform engineering team. It can also be application developers, or it can be a combination thereof. It doesn't matter, but no matter what we're doing, we're building a highly simplified, representative first version of a platform. You can think of it kind of like a hello world, and you can either do it like a sandbox type environment with test infrastructure, sample applications, or you can do what some of our customers do and come with a particular team in mind and architect based on them. We'll talk about that representative aspect in a bit, but no matter what, as long as you keep it representative, it follows this framework. The other thing we want to do by the end of this is have a product-like roadmap for iteration and growth. We also want to have an adoption plan by the end of this. You really should have an idea of how you want to move forward, not just technically for iteration and growth, but also in terms of scale. Scaling organizational change is very challenging, and that is part of something you need to start thinking about when you start small. The other thing that's critical to do inside of this process is seek out those stakeholders who will be able to drive adoption forward. So that is your pioneering team. It's people on other engineering parts of the organization. It's operations. It's security. It's anybody who would be really important in benefiting from that platform engineering initiative. So it's important to keep them in mind and to get them excited. And once you have them onboarded quickly, maintain that excitement throughout the whole process. And that's why speed is so important and why starting simple is the easiest way forward. And the other thing that's critical here that makes it easier to be successful is that you avoid having to win over every single team immediately. You can go slow, you can be sustainable, and you can be at a lot less risk by taking your time and getting team by team excited and onboarded with the platform engineering initiative. So we try to think of 4 key areas when we look at our MVPs. And really the biggest one is that it's representative. It has to be representative of the same stuff that the rest of your technical organization is using. Don't build an MVP for the 10% of outliers inside of your org. Build it for the 90% representative infrastructure, representative pipelines, and representative use cases that you will see. So one thing you can think about here is what are your common database types? What is the basic CI/CD that everyone is using that needs to be part of this? What's the basic application structure? That's really important as well. And then obviously basic networking stuff becomes critical. You can eventually get more advanced with your networking, but start very simple. If it's just private clusters, just stick with private clusters. If you need to be able to have something easily accessible, make sure that that's the case. But don't go into crazy networking and load balancing quite yet because it's not really the point. We're sticking in non-production environments for the MVP, so keep that context in mind. The other thing is it should be repeatable. So the skeleton process that you're going to do, as well as the actual foundational platform you're going to build, will be repeatable and you can build on them. The idea is really that you're giving yourself a quick start. You have a philosophy for onboarding new teams, but you also have a philosophy for thinking about and designing the scope of what the IDP can do. So always keep that in mind when you're building this stuff out. The third is iterative, and this sort of relates to repeatable as well, but the idea being that you can't solve all the problems of your technical org in one go, and it won't work if you try that, I promise you. If you start small, you start tackling critical problems first, sort of your big angry ones, especially things that are related to that sort of tension between dev and ops, those are going to be the most important ones to look at. Think about the future. Don't forget it. You know, when you're designing things, think about how easy it's going to be for you to modify them later on to different scenarios and contexts. But don't worry about actually fixing those problems quite yet. And finally, innovative. Now, this one's sort of a waffly one. You know, the process as a whole of platform engineering is innovative, so don't ever forget that. But know that the whole idea is that your platform should inspire people. It shouldn't undermine them. It shouldn't make them feel like you are just pushing an initiative on them for the sake of. It should actually solve problems, and that's incredibly important. I actually can't stress enough how critical it is to think of the MVP process and platform engineering as a whole as a problem-solving, outcome-driven way of being and way of thinking. So consider that when you build this stuff. There is a lot of benefits to doing things this way, and we have seen these firsthand. We have seen people avoid these common platform engineering pitfalls that sort of seem to just take everyone by surprise. And it's quite important, I think, to acknowledge these before you get started so that you know when you're falling into it. So the first one that we often see is people rush complexity. What you're going to do instead and how you're going to combat that is by starting small, iterating, and growing slowly. Embrace continuous improvement as a mindset and know you're not going to solve all of the problems of the world at once. I could probably hammer that home for an hour and a half, but it's just the number one thing we see people fail at. They get too complex too quickly. So continuous improvement is the way you have to think. The other thing people will tend to do is focus only on the tools and the technology stack. That's not going to help you either. What happens when you start doing that is it becomes all about technology. It becomes less about actual usability. So what you need to do instead is focus on supported golden paths. Track usage and adoption in order to make changes, and don't just make them haphazardly. When I talk about golden paths, I mean those ideal sunshine and unicorns, everything is perfect, amazing workflows that makes people's lives easier. not just for developers, but for platform engineers as well. So think about those instead of just focusing on tools. The next thing is that people will be building platforms and often you won't see anyone use them. They build something as a passion project or as a toy, or it's some sort of top-down mandate, and you end up with this awful, nasty thing that no developer wants to touch and no platform engineer wants to manage. So what you should do is focus on the users that actually have to touch it and the right level of abstractions for them. Don't abstract for the sake of abstracting. It should have intention behind it. An abstraction should make something easier for someone. So think about how an abstraction will impact productivity, how it will impact itself, which is a funny thing to say, but what I mean by that is how will an abstraction change things? How will it address problems? How will it create new ways of thinking and new ways of doing? And then finally, how will an abstraction improve satisfaction? It's a very simple measure to ask people how they feel about their day-to-day and about their process. And abstracting responsibly can get you there to a higher satisfaction much quicker. My final one, and kind of my favorite one, is that there are people, and it's not really a bad thing because it's in the name, but get stuck on this idea that developer experience is only about developers. But it's not. There is a whole community of people, from pioneers to champions to actually just the regular person that just has to use this thing eventually, that will benefit from better developer experience, but also the philosophies that drive developer experience improvements as a whole. Build a community of people that are excited about them and that can get behind the success and see the value. That is incredibly critical because otherwise this thing will never grow inside your organization. You'll have a really hard time adopting if people can't see the benefits of an improved developer experience. So think about that. So I want to touch on the differences between enterprise organizations and kind of everyone else, the small, medium businesses of the world that touch cloud infrastructure and are looking at platform engineering. Know, though, that adoption between them is very different, and you have to think about this as you start your planning for adoption in the MVP process. When you look at technical complexity, you need to consider that enterprises tend to be incredibly high. I cannot tell you about the number of enterprise customers we have where their infrastructure and technical needs are insane and overcomplicated and a giant mess. When you weed through them, even at the end of the day, it's still a high need technical complexity org because they often have more scenarios to address. We find the small and medium businesses are a little bit easier to deal with in the sense that they don't have so many legacy systems and so many different kind of organizational components that we have to think about. In terms of organizational maturity, it's also the same. You know, your small and medium businesses are early stage or they're mid stage, maybe they're below Series C. You have to think about it in that way too, because it's going to tell you what change management is like inside of an org. And when you have enterprises with high levels of technical and organizational maturity, change management may have its own process. It may have its own team that manages it. So that is an option too. For resource allocation, you're going to probably see a difference between small and medium businesses having this minimal and kind of split responsibility team versus dedicated teams on the enterprise side. So what we see a lot is enterprise comes to us to do MVPs with a dedicated team that's solely going to be working on that. This is their next 3 sprints. This is all they're going to do. Whereas when we work with small and medium businesses, we often have to be a little more flexible on the timeline because their human resources are minimal and their split responsibility between, let's say, building this thing out, but also at the same time managing infrastructure that currently exists, helping developers and moving things along their deployment pipelines. So that's important as well. With business initiatives, we see that enterprise is focused on profitability and growth, whereas small and medium businesses is focused on their product and growth. Small and medium SMBs are looking to get established as a product and grow around that, whereas the enterprise, it's already established, people know what it is, and now they want profitability. So the initiatives that underlie why platform engineering might be a thing for you will differ in this circumstance. So, you know, with the profitability side, we're often seeing business initiatives such as reduced cost of cloud infrastructure and faster time to market. That's very common. We see that a lot. But on the SMB side, I might see higher organizational trust or higher customer trust, or that they want to be able to service more engineers if they're able to hire more because they don't have to worry too much about managing infrastructure. So those are the sort of things that come out. Adoption timeframes, if you're a small, medium business, give yourself a year. It can be much quicker to adopt an IDP because you just don't have the organizational scale. Whereas enterprise, I'm going to suggest a year at least. 12 months to 18 months is not uncommon to get through a majority of the first migration cases. And then as things start maturing from there, you can add more, but you do have to think slow. And then finally, stakeholder tie-in. SMBs, generally the stakeholders are in the day-to-day or very close to the day-to-day action. So by stakeholders here, I mean management, I mean folks that make decisions. In enterprise, they're involved at a distance, and you may need to actually update them more often on what you're doing and how you're trying to achieve it in order to get there. So I want to touch on the challenges of enterprise adoption a little bit more, because these are tough. These are harder things to deal with. Small and medium businesses are much more agile. They're much more able to adopt and change at a greater pace in a lot of ways, even if they don't have great change management processes. It's easier for them to go through an entire org. But when it comes to enterprise, we see these as the common challenges. So huge increase in technical complexity. The estate covers a ton of ground, and it's a lot to be able to achieve every single use case inside of that context. There's also a lot more stakeholder management that needs to be done to actually get adoption of an IDP across an entire organization. So it's not just about, a CTO sign off or a CTO saying, yeah, give her, as we would say here in rural Ontario. It's actually more about the organization as a whole and how it can benefit. And there's often business processes that have to be gone through, and various procurement things for the different tools that you might want to use. There's a lot to think about in that way. The other thing about adoption at enterprise scale is it has to be well planned, has to be well managed. You probably could have a project manager just for this. That's really just a byproduct of the size of these organizations and the complexity. And the other thing that's quite interesting is generally we say, and I said this even earlier, that you need to build for 80% scenarios. And the 20% of the organizational needs need to be considered later. But sometimes there are enterprises where 20% of the outlying scenarios are the critical components that have to be built first or brought into the platform first. So for example, this could be the team that handles data processing. Maybe they're the first ones to come in, even though they have a very specific use case and a very specific set of technical needs. Without it, doesn't make sense to bring the rest of the org over. And that's the sort of thing you have to think about. And finally, legacy systems. They are horrible, and they cause grief, and they haunt the entire technical estate and will until the end of time. That presents a huge challenge when it comes to getting IDPs across enterprises. So let's look at how we're actually going to counter these. So the first piece of advice I can give you is to engage your high-level stakeholders about the value and the return on investment early on. And I don't mean return on investment just in the money sense. I also mean in the time sense. So by putting in the time now to build this MVP, how much time will you save later, or how much time will you save by not doing 1,000 tickets in the process? You have to sort of look at it not just from a financial perspective here. You should also be planning around technical complexity with focused and phased project plans and roadmaps. I think if you get to the next, when I get to the next point about project management collaboration, this will also help you, but it's important to break down what you're doing, when you're doing it, and when you can expect to be able to make additional changes or adopt more teams. Having that project management collaboration is key. So if you don't have strong aligned project management between your platform and your application teams, you will fail. They have to work together. And I'll touch on this a little bit more shortly. In terms of that 80-20% rule, we're thinking about that outlying 20%. Let's think about them the minute we start planning an MVP. Build a migration strategy to support them coming on board. Don't wait. It's going to be challenging to get those guys on first. But once they're on, it should be theoretically much easier to get everybody else, and the scope may be less complex for the next ones, and that will make things easier. If you think cyclically, it's going to make your life significantly better, and I'll touch on that too. And finally, with the legacy systems, just consider where and if they will ever fit in. Will they be migrated to containerized applications? Will they be deployed to Kubernetes? Are there initiatives to move away from legacy systems? If they're not, that's okay. You can ignore them. But if there is, see where that's at and where you can fit into that process. The other thing is that I mentioned this earlier, thinking outcome focus is going to bring you the most success. So if you start early and you share the project plans with managers with defined success criteria and outcomes, you're going to be better off. It is a very customer success thing of me to say, but identifying your success criteria early on, as well as the outcomes, is very important. So the way we do it is I define an outcome with my customers, and then we put the success criteria for how we're going to measure whether or not that outcome was achieved underneath it. So that would be the layering, which I would think of that. The outcomes you need to use should be aligned with business priorities. So time to market, being revenue driven, increased stability, security posturing. If you're a very highly secure org, those are the kind of things that you should align those outcomes with. Developer experience initiatives, engineering efficiency initiatives, all of that stuff can come in here. Report on the progress towards those outcomes and the success criteria. Include the wins, include the light bulb moments. They will happen. Don't be shy, because the more you scream from the rooftops about how exciting this is and how great platform engineering initiatives are, the more likely they are to get picked up quickly. Some orgs do things called QBRs. So this would be where your teams would have to present every quarter what they've been working on, or your lead would have to do something like this. It's great to kind of get a demo of the IDP put into one of those so that other management folks can see exactly what's going on and what the benefit is. We help customers with that quite a bit, and it's really effective, actually. And the final thing is showing ROI as you see it. So time is money, and any process that reduces time for common tasks is a big cost saver. You can make predictions around this, and I would highly recommend thinking about this while you're starting your MVP. Like I said, aligning your PM strategy with a migration plan is really important. So having that collaboration between your PM teams on the application side, the organization, the platform engineering organization side is going to be very important. Everybody should be aligned on outcomes, goals, and objectives. They should collaborate on the timelines, how things are going to be done, overcoming roadblocks. It's really important that they're collaborative. And once they do this, they can also build a migration plan. So the best adoption projects start with good migration plans that consider the teams that are coming board and the time it's going to take to bring those teams on board. It considers how technical complexity needs to change along the way as well. You can get a pretty rough idea of that by looking at how teams work now. And just know that the best way to think is in iteration cycles. Don't worry about solving everything at once. Put people into cohorts, and that is going to make this easier. A last note on legacy services, you do need to probably think of these at some point in most circumstances. So make sure you kind of put the time aside to think about this. If there is a plan to sunset and replace these systems, the best practice would be to start new projects as greenfield on this new IDP, and to just do that from day zero, day one, day zero. If that's the plan, that's the way you should look at it, and start prioritizing bringing those teams on board as they refactor / completely build their greenfield projects. If the legacy services have to stay, they're never going to align with platform engineering philosophy, the 12-factor application model that we recommend. It's not going to happen. Eventually, there is always a possibility that someone may want to talk about sunsetting them. But, that's not really something I would worry too much about at this stage. So I want to show you a simple MVP / a pilot adoption plan, because it goes beyond MVP for a large scale enterprise. This is actually built essentially based off a real customer that we work with. And I'm going to share it with you. We want to emphasize that you should be breaking adoption into logical phases and cycles. Do not just try haphazardly to do it. It doesn't work. You've taken your developer needs, you've taken best practices, and you've taken your tool chain and you've put it into this MVP. You can call it also a pilot program when you combine it with what we call the production readiness program. So stage 1, MVP, build this minimum viable platform, baseline and prove the concept and get people excited. Production readiness is about scaling and getting real life scenarios in place. If you didn't build with an actual team in mind, now's the time to build for one and get them using day to day. Whether or not they actually deploy to production, that's kind of up to you. We just like to say production readiness in the context of full-scale security reviews. We're able to go to prod if we want, but we don't have to. We could at any time, though, and that's how we think of it. So together, the MVP and the PRP could actually be called a proof of concept. If that's how you need to think about things, that's how I'd break it up. Once that's done and you start this cycle of getting new adopters, you're also going to start this cycle of getting new features. And once you do that, it's based on user feedback. You prioritize what needs to come on board, and then you evolve it from there. And that just continues ad infinitum as teams get onboarded and also as the needs change for those teams. It's really important to think of this thing as a product. This is one of the tenets of platform engineering. Your platform is a product, so think of it that way. And if you do, you'll be successful. But good products are successful because they take feedback and they evolve based on it. They listen to the needs of the users. Your developers are your users, and you as platform engineers are also users. Keep that in mind. Use that to build your iterative process, and you will be successful. So this is the actual timeline I'm looking at here. So we started with this customer in February, gathering prerequisites. We did a first MVP with them with one app, actually a real, it was essentially a duplicate of a real life application that they have. And we did the same thing with a second one. So two very different use cases we brought on. In kind of the end of March, beginning of April, we did dynamic infrastructure, which is something Humanitech does, the platform orchestrator does, and started building the rules and the guidelines around that to enable the golden paths. And then we started doing enterprise-ready activities. So what we needed to do in order to get them into the production readiness program was prepare them with some additional security integrations, optimizations around environments and CI/CD. So we had to make some tweaks with them there. And then finally, golden path optimizations based on teams actually touching and using the darn thing. And now we're in this really cool production readiness phase where they're actually getting ready to go full scale, start adopting across more than just a couple parts of the org. And this has worked really well as a model for a lot of our customers as well. Excuse me, different timelines depending on what your needs are, but it's absolutely possible to do things in the span of less than a year. So that is it for the main part of my presentation. And now we will bring back Maria for questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mallory. As always, very, very interesting. And I see that so many people attended and looking forward to questions. We already have one. How we can counter for unknown tasks come up once we start the planning or implementation phase? Should we take the unknown into consideration while planning?
Yeah, I mean, I am a big fan of kind of a thought process called flag the minefield. So what I tend to do here is, and I'll walk our customers through this too, is we'll sit down and start looking at their plan, their project plan essentially, which is to document and make with them. And we go, okay, what are the risks we could run into here? What potential things could pop up, even if they don't, that we should think about? Oh, this team's not going to be ready to migrate in time. They're not going to be ready with their containerized app. Okay, what's the backup plan? This is also good project management as a whole, I think, to be honest. So I would make sure, yeah, think about the knowns and the unknowns. The unknowns are the things that will really bite you. If you don't kind of do the exercise of flagging that minefield and sort of looking at where the potential problems could come up and building in those contingencies.
Makes sense. And I know this question comes up a lot, but how do you measure the success of this MVP?
Yeah, I mean, there's qualitative and quantitative ways to do things. So if we look at the qualitative side of things, this is where those objectives and success criteria come in from that traditional customer success perspective. So what we'll recommend here is that we have a bunch of questions that we put people through that ask them those tough things about, what sucks essentially for people's day to day. What are the business objectives driving this? And you can base the success criteria off of that. So, if I'm looking at one right now, for example, a success criteria would be that after a before and after process comparison for an engineering team, the creation of a new service with required infrastructure is measurably quicker. You can decide what measurably means, but each customer, that's different. We also, outside of that, so success criteria tend to be Boolean. They're either true or false. You either did it or you didn't. And if you didn't, you should have a good reason why. The other thing, and it actually speaks to something someone just posted in the webinar chat, is metrics. And I am a big fan of DORA metrics, but they are a lagging indicator. They will not show success of an MVP at all, honestly, in the time frame. You need a lot larger time scale to show DORA metric success inside of an IDP in a platform engineering initiative. So we actually came up with some other leading indicators, essentially, that we think are a good way of predicting success, because they are somewhat predictive. They're based on proportionality. So we calculate a complexity index, how it's a proxy for a degree of standardization and security. How complex are things? We look at that. We have a score for how autonomous people are. So it's like a self-service score. It basically relates to the number of requests that a team gets per year versus the number of developers that they're serving. So we look at stuff like that. Create time for a new service. That's a pretty good one. What are the times for common tasks? That's something, it's hard to fake that data, A, but B, it's something everyone will have that sort of tangible experience with. Onboarding time. That's another one. How long does it take to get a developer from, time to their first PR to their 10th? How long does that take? Does it take months? Does it take weeks? Realistically, it should take days. But, that's one of the things you can look at. And I think the most important one is actual satisfaction scores. Ask people how they rate stuff. It's very frou-frou-y. It's very not mathematical. It's very sales and customer successy, but it works. We ask people how they feel, and we ask them what they like and they don't like before and after. It's a very simple process. But yeah.
People like overcomplicate things.
They do.
Yeah, and the next question is also very stereotypical. I don't know how to pronounce that word properly, but what negativities do devs or any other stakeholders display? People don't like change, right?
They don't. This is such a good question, because as much as I would like to say it varies from organization to organization, you find there are buckets of complaints people have. Or worries that they have. And I would say one of the biggest ones, and this is a very valid concern people have, is that they will be made irrelevant by a platform. That they won't have their job anymore, or their seniority, or something will happen. That's kind of an ego hit. And you know what? Valid concern. I think everybody, especially in the age of AI, wants to think about these things. The way to think about it is, I think that the roles around infrastructure, the rules around pipelines, the rules around operational management are evolving. And when we work with teams on this, what we do, rather than focusing on the you should or you will, is focused on the here's why. And that's the difference. That's how we counter that. When we look at change management inside of organizations too, this is why it's so important to prioritize the teams that come on. The ones that are excited about it are the ones you should bring on first. Don't force people, those are generally the first cohort I'm always going to suggest, is the people that have to move to Kubernetes, for example, but are scared. The folks that are on Kubernetes and quite comfortable with managing it, with managing their deployments, leave them alone for a bit. Get the folks that have to do it, but aren't really excited about it, or are scared, or aren't sure how they're going to handle it. Those are the first ones you want to look at.
Yeah. Very interesting question. Regarding achieving consensus among the majority of stakeholders, what advice would you give to someone who has a large base of stakeholders always varying needs and preferences on tooling and level of abstraction?
Well, first thing is you need to prioritize people, or prioritize your different groups and your varying needs. So the most representative are the ones that should go first. The most representative ones that have the most pain should go first. And the way to sort of align people with varying needs and preferences is on outcomes. It's on the why, not on the how, not on the when, but the why. Focus on that, this is why we're doing this. This is the pain points we're trying to resolve. These are the things we're trying to correct. Not so much this is the thing we're going to do.
But
That's
what if then the other group who has like, some other pain, but has the budget and in the end of the day, then don't give you the budget?
Start with the one that will. Show the money. And generally too, if the pain points seem different across teams, chances are they're aligned in some way. So someone may describe a pain point one way and someone else might say something different, but maybe it's both related to they're frustrated by having to wait. Maybe it's related to a time to market issue. Maybe it's related to a stability issue. Who knows? And generally you'll find that there's common themes inside an organization.
Yeah, that's true. To your point about Dora, would you agree that even when Dora might not be representative, building a platform without DevOps awareness and embracement sounds harder than doing it with DevOps as a methodology to build and improve your IDP?
Well, Dora, I think, has its place. I think Dora has a lot to do with process, with how your process works. But it's not a proxy for team performance. I will say that about it. I do not believe it is a proxy for team performance, and I don't think it's fair to think of it that way. It's very much about flaws in process. I've been really lucky to do some panels with folks that are from the Dora team, and I think they would probably agree with me there. In terms of building a platform without DevOps awareness, well, that's why platform engineering exists, because it's an evolution on that idea of DevOps as a methodology. And the methodology kind of behind DevOps was that you build it, you run it. And platform engineering says, no, that's not fair. That doesn't work. That doesn't make sense, because it doesn't think about the humans behind that computer. And that's, I think the thing. If you can start embracing the platform engineering philosophy, even if you don't call it that, treating platform as a product, that treating human beings as humans, all of those important components that come with this philosophy we preach so much, and that our literal product is built upon, you will find it will become easier. So, not having DevOps awareness isn't a bad thing, I think, in this context. I think you can get a lot further with platform engineering as a philosophy because it extends beyond technical organizations if you do it right.
Yeah. How would you deal with the issue of generating pseudo data for your MVP?
I have no idea what that issue could be. If you're generating fake deployment data, I've never seen that, honestly. It's not about all of the qualitative or quantitative metrics. It's so much about experience. The success of the MVP is, I would say, more often than not driven by, did we achieve a happier developer in this process? Is it easier for platform engineers to manage infrastructure configurations? That's the thing. You can't really fake that. I mean, you could, I suppose, if you held a gun to someone's head and said, you like this process better, right? But it's a subjective thing. And I think in a way that makes this much more adoptable by people outside of engineering orgs and technical orgs. It makes it easier to swallow because the value that comes out of it isn't purely based in some metric that, that finance person or that board member will never understand. It's more about, hey, we have faster time to market now because we simplified this process, and look at how the developers feel about it.
Yeah, true. It's all about solving the pain point and then making life so simpler. No,
Yeah.
the thing you started with.
Work smarter, not harder.
True. If there are no other questions, I guess it is a wrap for today. Thank you so much, Mallory. As always, amazing session. And as I promised in the very beginning, we're gonna follow up with slides and the recording of the session so that you can either share with your team, with your stakeholders, get them aligned, and if not, we can help you as well. And that's what this methodology was designed for. And yeah, if you have any other questions for Mallory, you can ask them in the Platform Engineering Slack channel. And I also linked it in there in the chat. Anything else we should wrap it up with, Mallory? Any
No,
final
that's
words?
great. Thanks everyone again for joining in today, and your questions were fantastic. Much appreciated.
Thank you. See you guys.
Yeah.
Everyone has